March 21st, 1918, near Amiens, France. The morning the world became smoke and steel. Friedrich Weber lay in the mud, 19 years old, watching hell unfold around him. 20 feet ahead, through the barbed wire and cratered earth, a brown dog struggled, trapped, bleeding, howling into the artillery thunder. Weber's commanding officer screamed over the explosions, "Leave it! We advance in 2 minutes!" The photograph would later show this exact moment. Weber crawling through no man's land, reaching toward the dog tangled in wire, both of them surrounded by smoke and death. He had maybe 90 seconds before the charge whistle blew. His hands found the wire, found the dog, pulled it free and shoved it inside his coat. They survived the first wave together. 3 minutes later, the dog detected a gas attack before the klaxons sounded. 12 men lived because of those 90 seconds. This is where it started. One impossible choice that would cascade across an entire war. Germany was gambling everything on March 21st, 1918. The Western Front had been frozen in blood and mud for 3 years. American soldiers were flooding into France by the tens of thousands. German High Command understood the math. Win now or lose forever. Operation Michael was the largest offensive in history. 500,000 men, 6,000 artillery pieces, a 50-mile attack front. Friedrich Weber was supposed to be nobody, a farmer's son from Bavaria, conscripted in December 1917, 3 months of training before they shipped him to the front. Around his neck hung a stamped metal identification disc. Friedrich Weber, 5th Guard Division. Standard issue. 2 per soldier. 1 stays with the body, 1 goes home to the family. Weber expected to use both within a week. Instead, he made one decision under fire that changed everything. The spring offensive would ultimately fail. The German Empire would collapse 9 months later. But Weber survived. And decades later, researchers studying combat trauma would cite his story as proof that mercy under pressure isn't weakness, it's survival strategy. The dog had been there for days. Late March 1918, behind German reserve positions near Saint-Quentin, soldiers noticed a brown mongrel scavenging near the supply depot. Emaciated, matted fur, maybe 2 years old. It survived by eating whatever dead things it found in no man's land. Rats, corpses, abandoned rations. Weber spotted it on March 19th, watching from a distance while his unit prepared for the offensive. The dog reminded him of something from his childhood in Bavaria. Farm dogs that followed him through wheat fields. He broke off half his morning bread ration, 4 ounces, and held it out. The dog approached slowly, took the bread, and ate without looking away from Weber's face. Then it sat. Weber did something that violated regulations but felt necessary. He took his spare identification disc and twisted wire around it, creating a makeshift collar. He slipped it over the dog's head. "You're a soldier now," he said quietly. His squad mates laughed, but the dog stayed. For the next 48 hours, it followed Weber through communication trenches, past artillery positions, into the forward crater where they'd wait for 0 hour. Nobody stopped it. In a war that had already killed 16 million people, one stray dog trying to survive didn't register as a problem. At precisely 4:40 a.m. on March 21st, the world became noise. 6,000 German guns firing in unison created a sound that soldiers later described as the earth splitting open. Weber pressed into the crater wall, feeling the ground shake with each impact. Smoke shells mixed with high explosive, creating a thick fog across no man's land designed to hide the advancing infantry. The bombardment was scheduled for 5 hours. Then, the infantry would charge. Weber had maybe 8 minutes left in this crater before the whistle blew. That's when he heard the howling, high and desperate, cutting through the artillery thunder. The dog was 20 feet away, caught in British barbed wire, thrashing and bleeding from multiple cuts. Weber's sergeant screamed, "Ignore it! Stay in position!" Weber looked at the dog, looked at the wire, calculated. 90 seconds of smoke cover, maybe. He didn't ask permission. He crawled across open ground on his stomach, reached the wire, pulled the dog free using both hands, shoved the animal inside his greatcoat, and scrambled back. His hands were cut and bleeding. The dog was shaking but intact. The whistle blew. Weber and 68 men climbed out and ran toward the British trenches through smoke and gas. The bombardment had worked. British defenses were shattered. By 7:15 a.m., Weber's unit had advanced 2 miles into enemy territory. Casualties were lighter than expected. Then the dog started barking. By late March 1918, in captured British positions near Bapaume, the German advance had penetrated 40 miles, the deepest breakthrough since 1914. Newspapers in Berlin screamed, "Victory near!" But Captain Heinrich Reinhardt wasn't reading newspapers. He was watching Weber's dog. In the first week of fighting, the animal had alerted to 3 separate gas attacks before the official klaxons sounded. Chemical warfare was invisible death: chlorine, phosgene, mustard gas drifting on wind you couldn't see until you were choking on it. 3 minutes of advance warning meant survival instead of drowning in your own lungs. Weber's company started with 68 men on March 21st. After 7 days of constant combat, 59 remained alive. Standard offensive casualties ran 40 to 60%. The dog had somehow cut that rate in half. Reinhardt made it official through paperwork that labeled the animal unit mascot, a designation that technically violated regulations but nobody questioned during an offensive. Weber became the handler by default. Other soldiers started bringing food, bread crusts, tinned meat, whatever they could spare from their own shrinking rations. The dog ate everything and stayed alert. You could still count every rib through its fur, but its eyes were sharp and focused. Reinhardt sent a formal request up the chain of command, permission to keep the dog as a military asset. Division headquarters approved within 18 hours. Their reasoning was brutally simple. Anything that demonstrably saves German lives will be retained. What nobody included in the official paperwork: British intelligence officers had started noticing the reduced German casualties in Weber's sector. They began tracking what their reports called enemy patrol dog in daily briefings. The dog had made Weber's unit valuable, and valuable things get hunted. Early April, somewhere east of Amiens, Operation Michael hit its limit. The offensive hadn't broken through completely. German forces controlled more French territory than at any point since 1914, but they hadn't forced a British surrender. The advance was stalling. Supply lines stretched thin across 40 miles of cratered wasteland. Ammunition deliveries slowed. Food rations got cut in half. Weber's unit went from 2 meals daily to 1. Weber named the dog Kamerad, German for comrade. The word felt right. Around both their necks hung matching metal identification discs, Weber's regulation stamp and the makeshift wire-wrapped copy he'd created on March 19th. Kamerad ate from Weber's own portions without hesitation. Weber didn't think twice about it. The dog had earned every calorie. On April 3rd, at 2:47 a.m., Kamerad saved 12 lives. Weber's unit was sleeping in a captured British trench when the dog started barking frantically, sharp, urgent sounds that woke everyone instantly. 30 seconds later, British infantry appeared out of the darkness, bayonets fixed, trying to retake the position. 30 seconds. Just enough time for German soldiers to grab rifles and form a firing line. The counterattack failed. 12 men survived who would have died with knives in their backs. After that night, soldiers from other companies started asking about Weber's dog. Word spread fast in trenches. Reinhardt told them the truth without embellishment. The animal has operational value. That's all you need to know. But the truth was more complex. The dog wasn't magic. Weber watched Kamerad's behavior carefully over multiple weeks. The animal was reading patterns humans couldn't consciously detect. Air pressure changes before gas drifted in, ground vibrations from approaching patrols, wind direction shifts that carried scent ahead of danger. Things evolution had wired into animal nervous systems over millions of years. But human evolution had traded those abilities for abstract reasoning and tool use. The dog had kept them. And in April 1918, those ancient abilities were worth more than any weapon. Mid-April brought the collapse everyone had been dreading. The spring offensive was officially failing. German high command had gambled everything on breaking through before American reinforcements arrived in overwhelming numbers. They'd lost the bet. Supply lines were breaking down completely. Ammunition became scarce. Food became scarcer. And Allied forces were preparing a massive counteroffensive designed to push the Germans back to their starting positions. On April 18th, the order came down: prepare to withdraw. Weber's unit, now reduced to 31 survivors from the original 89, began a fighting retreat that would last 2 weeks and cover 40 miles. The same ground they'd captured in March, they now had to give back under constant Allied pressure. The dead from the March offensive still lay where they'd fallen, now bloated and decomposing in spring heat. Weber carried Kamerad when the dog became too exhausted to walk. The animal had a minor shrapnel wound in its left rear leg, not serious, but painful enough to cause limping. Other soldiers helped without being asked. Someone carried Weber's rifle. Someone else took his ammunition. A corporal named Ernst shared his canteen water with Kamerad directly. The bond had spread beyond Weber. Kamerad belonged to all 31 survivors now. They understood something fundamental that most civilians never learn. This dog was the reason they were still breathing. During the retreat, Kamerad detected 2 separate ambushes early enough for the unit to take defensive positions instead of walking into kill zones. The dog alerted to an incoming artillery barrage 45 seconds before the first shells landed, giving everyone time to find cover. Casualties that should have wiped out the entire unit became manageable losses: 3 wounded, 0 killed. Reinhardt wrote in his daily field report, which he knew division commanders actually read, "Dog continues to demonstrate operational effectiveness regarding early threat detection." The phrasing was deliberately clinical. Saying, "This animal is keeping us alive," would have sounded insane on an official document. By early May 1918, German forces had stabilized defensive positions roughly east of Amiens. The spring offensive was over, officially failed. Germany had thrown 500,000 men at the Western Front's strongest defenses and gained nothing permanent except casualties and territorial they'd immediately lost. Everyone knew what came next. American forces were arriving at rates exceeding 10,000 soldiers per day. Fresh troops, full supplies. The math was brutal and obvious. Germany had lost the war. Only the generals pretended otherwise. Weber sat in a muddy dugout with Kamerad sleeping against his chest, both of them covered in dried blood and trench mud. Around them, veterans talked quietly about home instead of victory. Nobody mentioned winning anymore. They talked about surviving the next week, then the next month, then maybe, if luck held, making it to whenever this ended. Weber had transformed from invisible conscript to recognized soldier, not because of heroic actions under fire, but because he'd chosen to save something helpless when direct orders said, "Move forward and engage the enemy." That single choice had cascaded across 8 weeks and 31 lives. The dog tags hung together around both their necks, identical in size and shape, both covered in dried mud and blood. One stamped with regulation text, one hand wrapped with wire, both marking soldiers. Subscribe now, because what happens next will break your heart and put it back together. June 1918 turned the trenches into industrial killing grounds. Allied bombardment became constant. British guns joined by French artillery, joined by American shells, all pounding German positions 24 hours daily. Weber's sector absorbed more high explosive in June than during the entire March offensive. And then, on June 12th, at approximately 3:20 p.m., Kamerad took shrapnel. An Allied shell exploded 30 yards from Weber's position, sending metal fragments in all directions. One piece, maybe an inch long, jagged, caught the dog just below the ribcage on the left side. Kamerad yelped once and collapsed. Weber dropped his rifle immediately, pulled the dog into the dugout, and started examining the wound. Blood soaked through brown fur. The shrapnel had penetrated maybe an inch deep, not immediately fatal, but serious enough to require treatment. Weber used his personal medical supplies, the bandages and antiseptic meant for soldiers, to clean and wrap Kamrad's chest. The field surgeon, a man named Hartmann, who treated every possible injury humans could sustain, helped despite regulations that explicitly forbade using medical supplies on animals. Hartmann didn't say much. He just contributed morphine from his own kit to manage the dog's pain. "This animal has saved more lives than I have," Hartmann said quietly while injecting the dose. "I'm not letting it die from a treatable wound." For 3 days, Kamrad lay still in the dugout, breathing shallow, barely moving. Weber stayed beside him every moment he wasn't actively on watch duty. The other 30 remaining soldiers contributed what they could: tinned meat, bread, even chocolate from Red Cross packages. On the 4th day, Kamrad lifted his head and ate a piece of bread from Weber's hand. Weber cried. He was 19 years old, sitting in a trench on the Western Front, crying over a dog he'd pulled from barbed wire 3 months earlier. Nobody laughed. Every man there understood what Kamrad represented, proof they were still human, despite everything the war had made them do. November 11th, 1918, 11 a.m. The guns stopped. After 4 years of continuous artillery fire, the sudden silence felt unnatural, like the world had broken. Weber stood in a trench near Verdun with Kamrad sitting beside him, both of them staring at nothing. The armistice had been signed. The war was over. Germany had lost. Weber's unit, reduced now to 17 survivors from 89 original members, would be going home. Except there was a problem nobody had considered during the ceasefire negotiations. Demobilization orders were clear. Soldiers returned to Germany immediately. Animals could not cross international borders without proper documentation: health certificates, quarantine periods, inspection protocols. French and Belgian authorities were enforcing these rules strictly. Weber had 48 hours to report to a staging area for transport. He couldn't bring Kamrad. The dog would either be left in France or destroyed by military police as a stray. Weber made his decision in approximately 5 seconds. He stayed. For 2 full weeks, he remained illegally in France with Kamrad, hiding in abandoned farmhouses, moving only at night, avoiding checkpoints and military police. Other veterans helped: French civilians who'd seen enough death, British soldiers who'd heard stories about the German dog that detected gas. Someone forged the necessary papers, someone else arranged transport in a supply convoy. Weber and Kamrad crossed into Germany in late November, hidden under canvas tarps in a wagon carrying machine parts. The metal dog tag still hung around both their necks, Weber's regulation disc and the makeshift wire-wrapped copy he'd created on March 19th. Both battered, both intact, both coming home. December 1918, a small farm in Bavaria. Weber's parents didn't recognize their son when he walked up the road. He'd left home 13 months earlier as a boy. He returned as something else, a man with eyes that had watched things no human should see. Beside him walked a scarred brown dog that wouldn't leave his side. His mother asked the dog's name. Weber answered, "Kamrad. He's a soldier." Kamrad adapted to farm life faster than Weber did. The dog protected livestock, befriended other animals, slept in the barn during cold nights. But every single night, without exception, Kamrad would leave the barn around midnight and sleep beside Weber's bed. Weber suffered nightmares, scenes from trenches, friends dying, gas attacks rolling in like fog, artillery shells landing close enough to feel the heat. The only thing that stopped the panic was Kamrad's presence. When Weber woke gasping and disoriented, the dog would press against him until his breathing slowed and the present became real again. The local newspaper ran a story in January 1919. Local soldier returns with war hero dog. The article mentioned Operation Michael, the gas detections that saved lives, the retreat across 40 miles of contested ground. Veterans from Weber's unit started appearing at the farm, men who'd heard Weber survived and wanted to see Kamerad one more time. Some brought gifts. Others just sat quietly with the dog, not talking, smoking cigarettes, existing in silence with the only creature who'd been there and understood. The 1920s passed quietly for Weber. He trained as a school teacher, married in 1923, raised 2 children. He wrote a memoir in 1935 called The Dog That Taught Me About Humanity. It was published by a small Bavarian press and sold maybe 200 copies locally. Nobody outside the region paid attention. The memoir wasn't about tactics or battlefield glory. It was about one decision, choosing to save something helpless when orders said move forward, and how that choice cascaded across months and lives. Weber wrote plainly, without drama. He described the barbed wire, the gas detections, the retreat, Kamerad's injury, the illegal border crossing. In one passage that would later become famous, he wrote, "Real wealth isn't what people can see. I was richer than any general because I understood what actually mattered." Other World War I veterans began sharing their own animal stories after reading Weber's memoir. Patterns emerged across testimonies. Soldiers who'd formed bonds with dogs, cats, horses, even birds during combat showed measurably lower rates of what we now call PTSD. The animals provided something no amount of training could, a reason to stay human. Kamerad lived to age 14, dying peacefully on the farm in spring 1932. Weber buried him under an oak tree with both dog tags placed in a wooden box. He planted flowers over the grave, sat there for 3 hours, and cried like he'd cried in June 1918 in that trench when Kamerad had been wounded. Weber died in 1979 at age 80. His funeral was attended by 2 surviving members of his World War I unit, both in their 80s now, and by dozens of former students he'd taught over 5 decades. The dog tags were passed to his eldest grandson. The memoir went out of print. The story seemed finished. But in 2010, a military historian researching WW1 animal stories discovered Weber's memoir in a university archive. It was republished with annotations, photographs, historical context. Suddenly, Friedrich Weber and Kamerad became known beyond Bavaria. The story appeared in documentaries, academic papers, military working dog training materials. Weber's great-grandson donated the dog tags to a World War I museum in Berlin. They're displayed now in a glass case. Unknown dog, Spring Offensive 1918, saved 12 lives. A photograph accompanies them, black and white, 1919, showing Weber on his farm with Kamerad sitting alert beside him, both wearing the metal tags. Visitors stop at that display longer than at most others. Museum staff noticed. People read the plaque, study the photograph, look at the dog tags behind protective glass. Often they're quiet afterward. The Great War had famous animal heroes, Sergeant Stubby, Rags, Cher Ami. But Kamerad was different. Never trained. Never bred for combat. Just a starving stray in the right place when a 19-year-old made one decent choice. Present day. The museum gets visitors from around the world. They walk past artillery pieces, uniforms, weapons. Most stop briefly at each display. But at the dog tag case, people linger. They photograph the tags. They read Weber's memoir excerpts printed beside the glass. One passage gets quoted constantly. "I didn't save that dog because I thought it would save me. I saved it because leaving it to die would have meant I'd already lost myself." The dog tags sit side by side, one stamped Friedrich Weber, 5th Guard Division, one makeshift wire-wrapped copy worn smooth by time. Both corroded, both intact. Weber added an inscription before donating his tag. 2 soldiers, 1 human, 1 dog, both saved each other. Real heroism isn't glory. It's choosing mercy when the world demands cruelty. The metal is cold, the story is warm, and both will outlast the empire that tried to destroy them.